Hi and welcome on behalf of Blueprint Career Development. My name's Donna and I'll be taking you through this short presentation that outlines the rules of evidence as they apply to assessment in the VET system. So specifically what we'll be covering is a quick overview of the types of evidence with common examples and also the rules of evidence themselves and how they can be practically applied to a VET assessment. So the three types of evidence that we might collect are classified according to whether they are direct, indirect or supplementary. So direct evidence is proof that's been collected directly by the assessor, for example, the assessor observing and questioning the student. Indirect evidence has not been gathered by the assessor. So for instance, a third-party report from a supervisor, work product samples or videos are also good types of evidence. And lastly, supplementary evidence supports a claim of competence but needs to be verified or have evidence that points in the same direction for consistency. So for example, references, past qualifications and position descriptions. As you can imagine, evidence refers to proof, so I'm going to use some detective type analogies at times to help with understanding. The rules of evidence are designed to guide us on what constitutes acceptable proof of competence. The proof might come from someone who has been formally trained and then assessed in the content, or from someone who presents evidence for recognition of prior learning, or RPL for short. So let's have a look at some of the common types of evidence that a learner may provide. They may do a live demonstration of skills or a recorded demonstration. They could produce photos of products, work areas and equipment, for example. They may provide video and audio recordings, completed projects or reports, work samples like completed documents, articles or different products. And the example on the PowerPoint is, a pie, that's a product. They may respond to questions and case studies. They may provide third-party reports, references or testimonials, and also certificates and awards. So before an assessor determines whether a learner is competent or not yet competent, they must review all of the evidence submitted by the learner against the following 4 rules of evidence. The evidence needs to be valid. Is the evidence assessing what it's supposed to? So the unit of competence is a great reference point for that. Sufficient is about has there been enough evidence provided, and does that evidence all point in the same direction? In other words, does it all point to the person being competent, or is there a discrepancy in one piece of evidence compared to another? Is it current? So is it up to date? And is it authentic? Can we be assured that the evidence is the candidate's or the learner's own work? So let's go through those one by one. Valid is about the learner having the skills, knowledge and attributes as described in the unit of competence. So you must make sure that you have unpacked the unit of competence really carefully. Valid means that there's a clear relationship between the evidence requirements of the unit and the evidence on which the assessment judgment is made, so the evidence that the student produced. Valid evidence encapsulates the full breadth and depth of the competency standards, so requires the use of a number of different assessment methods. Assessment methods chosen need to ensure that the evidence collected covers all of the requirements in the unit of competence. So, to use an analogy, a detective makes sure that all the evidence relating to the actual crime is collected and reviewed before any prosecution would go ahead. In VET, we make sure that all the evidence relating directly to the unit is collected and reviewed before we make a determination of an outcome. So how can we make sure that evidence is valid? We need to verify that there is a direct relationship between the assessment tasks, the evidence presented, and the assessment requirements of the unit. And this is usually shown on a mapping matrix. Our second rule of evidence is sufficient, and the sufficiency of evidence ensures that the assessor, that the quality, quantity and the relevance of the assessment evidence. Sufficiency relates to the amount of evidence collected to make sure that all aspects of the competency standard have been captured and satisfy the need for repeatable performance. Supplementary sources of evidence are sometimes necessary for sufficiency to be demonstrated. So, for example, in terms of repeated performance, you would need to observe a student perform a task 2-3 times, perhaps, to make sure that they'd actually got it right and knew what they were doing and why, and had recalled that, rather than just maybe assessing them once, where in 2 months' time they may forget. So in our crime scenario, our detective would use what's called corroborating evidence to build a case, to make sure that there is sufficient evidence. And to make sure that we have sufficient evidence in VET, we need to make sure that we collect evidence over time and in different situations to demonstrate consistency. Our third rule of evidence is about currency. And so currency proves that the learner has the knowledge and skills to perform the task to industry standards right now. This requires most of the assessment evidence to be from the present or the very recent past, and generally evidence produced within the last 3 years is considered to be current, but that can depend on the industry. So, for example, evidence produced 3 years ago in the IT sector may have little relevance or currency today. Verifying currency is particularly important when there's a candidate seeking recognition of prior learning. Evidence for RPL may be a combination of historical and recent evidence to show a total picture of current competence. It's hard to find an analogy here with our little detective, but if someone were a bank robber many years ago, they would be unlikely to have the skills right now to break into the electronic banking system. So we need to make sure that what we're testing is their current skills, not their skills as they were 10 years ago or 5 years ago. To make sure that evidence is current in VET, we need to check the dates of when the evidence was produced. And for more information about the rules of evidence, go to our assessment training manual, assessment cluster training manual. Our final rule of evidence is about evidence being authentic, so that the assessor makes sure that any item presented for assessment is the learner's own work. Authenticity relates to ensuring that the evidence gathered is from the candidate for whom certification will be issued. Direct assessments produce authentic evidence easily because the assessor sees the candidate's skills or hears their answers to questions. Indirect and supplementary assessment evidence, such as self-directed projects and work samples, may need further authentication. Authenticity can also be particularly problematic with online and correspondence courses. With our little analogy, our detective makes sure that the fingerprints and other physical evidence found at the crime belong to the criminal, not to Auntie Ethel who dropped in for tea. In VET, to ensure evidence is authentic, if substantial proportions of the evidence is gathered through independent study, many RTOs will consider using login and password access. They may collect ID documentation, have statutory declarations signed, and use plagiarism identification software. Also, to make sure evidence is authentic, it's a good idea to use more than one method of assessment. For example, a project followed up with an interview to clarify the project stages, or supplementary information in the form of a third-party report for managers and supervisors. So once the assessor is assured that the evidence provided by the student is valid, sufficient, current and authentic, they'll be able to make a determination of competent. The next step from here is to record, report and validate the results, then issue certification to the student. So what I'd like to do now is take a quick look at some sample items of evidence that we're going to use as being submitted for the unit BSB CMM 401, make a presentation. So our first item of evidence here is a Bachelor of Education. It falls into the indirect evidence category. And if you have a really close look at it, there's something suspicious about the document. And so I want to address those. So the first one is that JP certification, which this is certified up on the top right hand side, doesn't say that the original was verified. It simply says that it's a true copy. So if the original is fake, the copy is a JP certified fake. The other thing is the lines that are near the name or at the top of the name seem odd. And, you know, like the page was folded or there is something strange about having a line at the top of the document. Also, without a transcript of results, it's difficult to see how valid the content of this Bachelor of Education is in comparison to the actual unit in question. 1991, when this one was issued, is old. So while the evidence may still have some relevance, it does need to be supported by more current proof of knowledge and skills. And I guess a question that you could ask yourself here is, what else would you request in order to make sure that that is a piece of evidence that you should be looking at and have relevance to the unit of competence, make a presentation? So let's have a look at our second piece of evidence. And our second piece of evidence is Chris Brown's resume, which is a supplementary form of evidence. This therefore needs verification or reference checking. But what it does do is give context and information that an assessor could explore with questioning. So thanks for joining me, and please check out our other TAE training and support videos. They're available through your Accelerate login and also on our YouTube video. Thanks and have a terrific day. Bye for now.